Okay, a little explanation to start. Yeah, done 2.5 hours work and it just disappeared. So what I was left with was what I've got here from the chat box, because I asked it to remember what I'd wrote, and it's not anywhere near what I wrote, but this is what we've got, and in some respects it's maybe easier to explain like this than my way. So I'm going to read it from script. I've got 5 pages, maybe 6, so I'll get through it as quick as I can. So we go back before the Ripper, before the name, before the fear. That's the chat box talk. Back to the Thames torso murders. Bodies without heads, without names, cut with knowledge, not rage. Well, I kind of like that, because the chat box is telling them it's cut with knowledge, which they had the time to cut them up. So where did they cut them up? So this was not panic, this was practice. Someone learning. Now that's a student, now that's me anatomy. People in anatomy. And when I started on my big storyline, it started back in 1806 and went through all the forensics. Now I believe that they used forensic to cover the forensics. The work was forensic on the crime scenes. So yeah, this is why I kind of like it in its simplest form. This was probably someone learning, right? Well, someone learning for me would be a student. Someone perfecting, that's another thing for students. So were these bodies used in anatomy? All of these torso murders. These bodies were not left in the street. Well, that's what the chat box says, but apart from one that was hidden, I think it was as the new Scotland Yard building was being built, they come across a torso in there, and that obviously got related to the torso murders. But yeah, left in the streets? No, they weren't left. Yes, they were left in the street. These bodies were not left in the streets. Sorry, got that wrong, because they were left in. They were left in the Thames. Some bits were left in a garden. Yeah, and the Pigeon Street one was left in the back lane. And then it says they were hidden, broken up, moved. So it's admitting the bodies were moved, and it's kind of saying, well, it's not admitting anything, it's just saying the bodies were moved. And that fits my theory that in the Ripper cases, apart from the stride, all the bodies were moved. In the torso cases, they had to be moved because they weren't found in a room full of blood, because they'd been chopped up. So all the torso ones were moved. The only one that wasn't moved was Liz Stride, because she was killed where she was found, in my theory. So this actually fits quite nicely in my theory. So we're going to go to the second one. So I like this bit, because it says this takes time. You can't cut somebody up in a public place. So it takes time, I agree. This takes privacy, I agree. This takes access. So you have to have access to somewhere. Not a man in a panic who had the access. Right, so he had to have access to somewhere to do this. Now after this, and this is the chat box, right, version, right, because it chucked mine out. You've got doctors, anatomy rooms, places where death was normal, places where no one asked questions. Well, you wouldn't ask questions because you just turn around and say, oh, it's just found a body in the street, and yeah, let's dissect them, because at that time, because of the 1823 law, it tightened up after the Burke and Hare carry on in Edinburgh, which I mentioned in talk on this. They tightened everything, the laws up, so you could use, I think you could still use criminals, and you could use bodies that weren't claimed as well. So, hey, these lasses, Burke and Hare broke the mould and they killed people. So the bodies were fresh for the, and here we have these young lasses being chopped up. Whether they were murdered first, we don't know. Then something else changes, the method changes, no more hiding. Now the bodies are left out. Right, well, it made that up because that's not my theory. My theory is they were staged. And apart from Liz Stride, none of the bodies were at the scenes. The scenes were staged. The people were paid. And that's my theory anyway. And then it says on display. Well, I've got no written next to that. The Whitechapel murders, fear is now the purpose. I agree. Not removal. No, they didn't have to remove them because it was staged and the bodies were never there, in my theory. But reaction, not removal, but reaction, that's what they were after. They were after a reaction. So what caused the change? Why go from silence to public order? This was to put fear into the people, in my mind. Stop them asking questions. Well, put them in scare mode. Because possibly with the Pinchin Street ones, they were maybe starting to become wise to how the bodies were turning up in places, and you know, so they had to change the modus operandi, which they did with the Llewellyn Code, which I've explained earlier, and change it into the 5 staged ones, because they couldn't keep putting body parts. They needed them nearer to where they wanted them to be. So they wanted them in a certain place to get maximum effect and possibly move it away from the actual crime scenes, where they chopped the Pinchin Street ones up and they needed it to move. The crime scenes had to be staged in an area to make it look like that area had been targeted by a maniac. Right, so we move to the next part, right? Well, that's the Cleveland Street scandal. A house, a secret, young boys, powerful men, messages being carried, and names being known. Right, well, this is where bribery, we know bribery took place, because I think it was Lord Somerset's trial proved that. Now, he was a high-ranking Freemason, and we've got a reference to Freemasonry on the writing on the wall, in the way the Jews was spelt. So, for me, that's a link. There's too many people involved, and now they had a risk of exposure. So, let's bury Cleveland Street. This is my theory. So let's bury Cleveland Street. So how can we do it? Well, make a big deal of the next ones. We've got rid of all these young lasses, that the couriers. Let's make a big deal and move the scenes to a different place, because the others could have been connected. You only need to find out one and you've got where they come from. So it was getting suspicious, so they moved it to Whitechapel. and this is why they staged the crime scenes, because that's where the couriers were taking the information. But I don't believe the original ones, the Pinchin Street ones, got out of where I believe they were murdered, the Knightsbridge area. So, and that's, again, I've got to keep saying it's my theory. If names come out, if connections are made, then everything falls. Now, I agree with this. Not just men, but systems. Now, we know from the Wikipedia site that the royal family were involved, because Somerset was, he worked in the stables. I think he was in charge of the stables, so it had been a big noise in the stables. Yeah, and he was a personal friend of the Prince. Now, the Prince of Wales, which is my Llewellyn code. Yeah. So what do you do? You create noise, right? So they've got to make the noise bigger and somewhere else. Whitechapel. You create fear, so people don't want to go out. Everybody's talking about it. Somebody's murdering in Whitechapel. So you create something bigger. So that's why they pushed it in the newspapers. Because let's face it, I think the Torso murder's horrific anyhow, but the Torso murders, that's pretty vile. What they done to them women, them 4 women, in my mind, the Ripper ones, was also disgusting. But yeah, they used a different MO just to hide the fact. So they had to change it. So on this timeline, they had to have one happen or something. I don't know. Was that the Pinchin Street one? Did that happen within this timeline? The chat box said it did one day, and then it said it didn't the next. So I'm not sure. Yeah, because they've got to keep them going as the Pinchin Street ones, or else it'll look like the same person just changed his method of operation. So they still had to have one in the middle of it, which it did originally say, and it fit into my theory, because that would mean they had 2 murderers, because they were both doing it differently. And it's funny that it happened in the Whitechapel area. The Pinchin Street one was the railway line on that main road, I think. So you create fear, you create something bigger, right? You create. Now this is what the chat box wrote, not me, the chat box. So we'll carry on with its wording. Enter Jack, not a man, a role. Now I agree with that, because I think Jack was part of an organised crime. A name used, a story built. Now that's a storyline for me. That goes back with the Canonical 5. Right, now Canonical 5, yeah, when you get into it, who decided to call it the Canonical 5? Now it was 100 years after this, and we all know that top secrets are kept for 100 years before they come out, or around that time. Maybe released it a little bit earlier, who knows. I think it first got used in late 1970s. So yeah. So, but who come up? What kind of a name is Canonical 5? It had to have a reason, and that's where I split it with the code. Canon is a name. Now, and I could just see it. I just seen Conan in it. So I looked up Canon and Conan. Then I found out a canon of Conan was how a canon's used to protect somebody's stories. So Conan had a canon to protect the originalities of his stories, just in case somebody changed them later on. Well, that's how it's like the reference book. In my theory, it's like a reference book to murder. So, but it's just my theory, and he was interviewed and let go at the time. Yeah, Conan was. So, yeah, so you've got Conan, right? Then you've got Ickle. Now I googled Ickle, and Ickle meant pertaining to, right? So Conan pertaining to 5. Why 5? Because they only staged 5 and they knew it. Now I said that in my first one I ever done, and that's why I got 5 staged crime scenes. It's a storyteller, so his stories and let's set the scene. So as we said, that's where I get staged crime scenes from. Now the streets are filled with fear. And now the papers have their monster. Yep, it's telling you, this is the chat box again, that the newspapers have their monster. The big selling point, they're going to sell a lot of papers, so push the papers. Now, no one is looking in the right direction, so they're not looking at Cleveland Street, they're looking at the Ripper case. Both happening at the same time. The investigation into Cleveland Street was ongoing. This is where I believe there were couriers, and that's why they were murdered, because they had information. They were passing information through Whitechapel to a contact, and they knew where the contact was, or they had to go and find them. So, and basically, there's somebody was sent out to do the dirty. Well, give them a drink, get them a bit dizzy, and took them to the mortuary where they'd done the rest. And all they had to do after that was stage the scene. So the police were overwhelmed or directed. Now, I believe directed is an important word in that, because the police were part of the staging of the crime, and that's my theory as well. They made it look like they were chasing a shadow, that's on the chat box, while something else is being kept quiet. So now that was on the chat box. So what it's saying here for me is it's recognising that there's a cover up, but it's using another crime to cover a crime up, and that crime can't be about bribery or corruption. Now, when I was stop talking to me on the Jack the Ripper site, because I'm not that good at spelling anyhow. So what I done was I wrote something, and the fella got annoyed, and I'd asked a question about something, and he sarcastically said, "Well, I'm a 33. I was a 33 degree fellow," and I thought to myself, "Well, what's a 33 degree?" When I looked it up, it's like a high-end person in the Masonic Lodge. Whether he still is or not, I don't know. He's probably got kicked out after talking to me. Anyhow, he said sarcastically, "It's about bribery," because he was talking to me. He could say, "Oh, because it just got on my head because it was too thick to understand." But that's the bit that I thought was interesting. So I sent him one back. Wow, I didn't know it was about bribery. And basically, nobody talked to me again after that. So I moved on to a MISPA case after that, which is connected to this as well, believe it or not, because I found it quite interesting. The right direction, the police overwhelmed or directed. Chasing a shadow, yeah. Well, they still say they haven't caught him yet. Well, they wouldn't if they were the people that done it. they were ticking their own box in my theory. So while something else is being kept quiet, yep, the Cleveland Street cover-up, the timing, not years apart, but touching right now. The thing was, the Cleveland Street thing, I think everybody knew about it, and that's the problem. They had to suppress it with something else. The Pinchin Street was blowing itself out of proportion, so they had to, and the Torso ones. So they brought in the Jack the Ripper case. Now that was in 1888, and the Cleveland Street broke, and it was tried. They tried not to sensationalise it, but thanks to one person, it was sensationalised, which they didn't like. And it says here, one bleeds into the other. So we asked the question, was the first set of murders practice? No, I don't think it was practice. I think they just got rid of the first couriers. They tried to do it in a horrific way. And it wasn't as visible as they wanted it to be, so they had to change it to make it more visible and sensationalise it. Then comes the Jack the Ripper stuff. And the second set, a performance. Well, I agree. The second one was staged. It was a performance. And who benefits? The man with the secret, or the men, plural, men, who will be blamed for nothing. So I'm going to leave it there, and I've got another one to do later on. But I like to stay. I watched a Lancashire recruitment video, and the person that was recruiting was in an important MISPA case a couple of years later. And it's funny because it come onto my YouTube, and it's weird because later on this is relevant to the Ripper case. Now this happened in 2024, 25, probably around about COVID, because I had no to do when I thought I'll look into stuff. And that case, for me, it was interesting because I thought it was staged. It was a MISPA case, and I thought it was staged. I just listened, looked, listened, and learned. Teacher told me that once. And basically, the crime, once this woman become in charge, was exactly the same. This MISPA case was exactly the same scenario as a Colombo had watched, and that was called Blueprint for Murder. Now, there was often a comment about it being the Truman case by the husband of the missing person, which I found quite interesting. But if we go back to that Lancashire, I think it was 2021, on Facebook, recruitment case, where the lead detective, that was the lead detective on this MISPA case, was in charge of a training case in 2021. And she was looking for people interested in joining. And what she done was, she had a video out of her talking and everything. Never took that in. But what I did take in was the clapperboard she had next to her. And written on the clapperboard was Sherlock Holmes and Colombo. So when I looked at that case of the missing person, I could see the scenario of Blueprint for Murder after she took control of it. And also what you get in the Ripper case is police involvement, and I believe politics was involved. We had politics in the MISPA case, and the police acting strange because they shut down all the media posts, and they changed the street name They also asked for car footage, but nobody had any. Well, they wouldn't. She was never there. It's just a theory. Are they still staging crimes to this day? Well, if you look at Blueprint for Murder and where Markham hides the body in a stable, say, right? He goes to Colombo to dig up the pyre at expense, and to his humiliation, after they dig this really expensive concrete post out the ground because it's for a skyscraper, is humiliated in public. But what happens is Markham is the killer. He goes away because the post's set to be reset the next day, and the body's found. Markham goes, gets the body, brings it back, and his intention was to throw the body into the hole. So when they pour the concrete, that's it. Now that the people would never be able to dig it up again for a long time. So Colombo could have lost his job, but he was waiting for him coming back because he knew that's what he'd do. Now, in the Misper case, it was about a river, and the body was never found in the river. And the police on the Friday, everybody was looking for him, and this good fella offered his services at Ivor, a good man, and he went up and down that river with a fine-tooth comb and said there was nobody there. Right? They dug the pyre out, he searched the river, there was nobody there. No. So where were they? We don't know. One lad said she was in a drain. Another theory was she was somewhere else, and the plan was the plan was quite interesting, but they didn't get rid of her because something happened, so they had to run. That's my theory again. But it's an interesting case, and it seems to be coming back to light as we speak. I've seen it again, but it really got shut down. But the funny thing is, Rishi Sunak, who was the Prime Minister at the time, thought it was important to get somebody to look at the case. I think it was Suella Braverman. So she looked into the case and she sent a fella called Snowden, looks like Tintin, and his second name's like his dog, the name of his dog, Tintin's dog. And when he finished looking at everything, for just some random reason, he said, it's a wrap. You know, like what you do with a film. So I found that quite interesting as well. So, stage crime scenes. Oh, they're still happening today. Let's face it. I watched Rupert Lowe the other day when he said on YouTube something about organised crime, and it goes to the top. And you can read that on YouTube or watch it on YouTube. So I believe Rupert's maybe more plugged in than people want to admit. I think he's a fantastic bloke. So anyhow, that's me finished for the day. Thank you for your time, and if anybody wants to comment or correct me on anything, I don't mind being corrected. Okay, thank you.